Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Van Helsing. So, a very interesting thing happened in this episode. I mean, interesting in the way of being extremely sad. Apparently, the girl, like kind of the youngest in the group, here in the hospital, they're in the hospital. I'm talking about like it's happening in real life. But they're in the hospital, ended basically Flesh, woke up and found her hanging. So it's just all apparent like, sadly she committed suicide, which is kind of like, that in itself kind of gave me some reserve. It's kind of like, why would she do that? Maybe she just legitimately got tired of everything. Maybe just too much. I mean, considering what the situation is, maybe she just lost all hope. It's something I didn't actually bring up in the like original, about the first episode when I was talking about it, is that you got a little bit of backstory on her. The fact is that basically her mom, dad, and brother went on vacation. I think it was the Hawaii or something, but she made some excuse not to go, and then everything happened, and so that's why she's not with her family right now. And she kind of felt so bad about it. I think it was connected to a boyfriend. I think that was kind of the reason why. So, but I never brought that up, so I thought this kind of be an interesting episode to kind of bring that back up. So it could be a situation to kind of like, hey, she got tired of everything because like it's just one thing after another, and she just couldn't handle it. And maybe in her mind wanted to be reunited with her family, but that turned out not being the case because Doc looked her over because it's like she had a missing finger, and I was like, okay, what's up with that? And then Doc points out the fact that she was strangled, so she was made to look like she killed herself, and it's like, okay, who would do that? And literally the only suspects is everyone there, and there's no clear way of telling who actually did it. My money. I mean, obviously you have John being like, oh, it's obvious Flesh did it, because that once upon a time a vampire freak, it's obviously him. He's still got his urges and stuff like that. Because John's the one that gives him the most crap about it. It's just like, John's fixing some soup or whatever. I mean, Flesh is fixing some soup and whatnot, and John's like, I'll fix my own food. I don't want to take the chance that you're poisoning me or something. So he's the most I mean, I get where he's coming from, but I feel like he's not necessarily like that towards the Doc. I mean, I guess maybe Doc hasn't been human long enough for him to give her shit about the circumstances, but he jumps down Flesh's throat anytime he gets a chance. I mean, he did kind of throw Doc under the bus, saying like, oh, she could be lying, that she could be lying to Axel, being like, yo, but that actually was Doc behind it, which, I mean, who knows? Maybe the Doc is kind of throw suspicion off herself by admitting to all these things, because maybe what we don't know is the fact is that even though they're human, the urge to kind of be a vampire is still lingering inside of them, and they're not willing to let it go. And maybe not maybe subconsciously they ended up doing it, and then when they snapped to it, they realized what they did, and so they were like, no, and so they killed her. Like, I mean, they staged it to look like a suicide, but initially it was kind of their vampire, like their old mindset of being a vampire kind of kicking in. Because an interesting thing on that note was kind of like the conversation between Doc and Flesh. Flesh had been back being human a little bit longer than Doc, so he saw the ramifications of it, just kind of like how it makes you feel, all your feelings coming back and everything. And he was talking about the fact that Doc had it easy, and Doc's like, what are you talking about? I was locked up in a cage, like, legitimately, I feel bad for Doc. It's like, no matter what the circumstances is, being a vampire and being turned back to human, it can't be the easiest thing. But I still don't think she has it as bad as she thinks she does. I mean, granted, she does have it bad because she was locked up in a cage, plus having those vampiric urges of like eating something but never being able to get it is enough to kind of drive you crazy, I guess. Having your human brain completely taken over by a vampire is like, it's just like the only thing you can focus on is needing to eat and tear people apart and drink blood. That's all you have going on through your mind. So I guess that's enough torture on its own. But it's like, truth be told, his Flesh still got the upper hand on you because he killed his own family. You luckily didn't kill anyone. You had Axel there to thank for that, because he fed you with his blood, so you never had to worry about it. Plus, you were always on the inside, so you never had any interactions with any other vampires, because Flesh kind of points out, we finally learned the guy's name is Julius. Basically, he was very, there were many things that Flesh did as a vampire, I'm sure, that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Not just stuff with his family, but also stuff that he just did under orders from Julius, and stuff that he did of his own volition just because he felt powerful and wanted to do it. It's like all that's going to haunt him, but it's like you got stuff to haunt you. I mean, granted, there was a whole situation about Axel kind of bringing it up again, being like, yeah, but you tried to save that soldier that was trying to get back in. Axel was basically saying like, oh, you tried to save him and that's how you got bit. And because Axel's like, oh, I know you. She's like, you don't know me. Like, because Axel's, like I said, still on the impression that she tried to save that dude, where we know, because of the second episode, ended up finding out, it's like, no, she didn't try to save him. She literally tried to push him back out because she was so terrified that she was willing to let him die just to save her own skin, even though, that was it's like you can't, like, I'm not trying to fault her for it, because it's like, when the going gets tough and you're afraid, it's like, there's no telling what people will do. People will do the most disaster, like, very just like shocking things you would never, considering who she is, being a doctor, you'd think she'd want to help people, but the fact is that she's willing to do that. Maybe the entire time she was a vampire, she had that rolling around her brain. Like, she was able to forget it because she was a vampire, but now that she's back to being human, she remembers what she did. And the fact is, being bit and turned into a vampire was her punishment. But remember, at the same time too, because Axel and her had that promise, like, whichever one of them turned, the other would kill them. And then, like, Axel's like, okay, I'll do it. Like, we made that promise, and she backed away. It's like, please don't kill me. So, I don't know. It's very conflicting. Maybe that part of her is just kind of like, she feels bad because it's like knowing what she did. And the fact is that she begged Axel to spare her life, and she didn't have to think about it as a vampire, but as a human, she does. And then an interesting thing also in this episode was like a conversation between Sam and Flesh, where basically Flesh kind of described what it was like being a vampire, the straight, the enhanced senses, which that in itself piqued Sam's interest, because he was like pointing to his ears, like, yeah, even hearing. So part of me's worried. It's like, what if Sam does try to become like a vampire to kind of get his hearing back? Because it does. I kind of figured this was the case, but like anytime, because that's kind of like how most vampire genre stuff works. It's like, once you become a vampire, any wounds that you had previous to you becoming a vampire automatically heal. And in Flesh's case, he had like a shoulder that was kind of messed up, but it healed when he became a vampire. But now that he's human, it reverted back to normal. He can feel it coming back, which he's okay with, because it's more of a key sign of like, hey, I'm me. And then Sam also asked the very important question of, do you miss being what you are? Which we never actually got Flesh's answer, but I'm sure the fact is he does. And that's why I'm kind of conflicted on this whole thing about the girl that died. It's like, maybe it could have easily been one of them kind of trying to hold on to that vampiric need inside of them, wanting to be a vampire again. Because it's something that became you for so long. You were able to push everything aside, all your pain, just anything that was bothering you, you were able to push it aside, because all that mattered was like the power you had and feeding on people. So having that going and having everything kind of rush back to you, kind of weighing you down, it's gotta suck. But especially just because, like I said, I get the feeling that hunger is still there. But that doesn't mean that Doc or Flesh did it. And it's like, I don't know who it could be. I mean, it could easily be Sam, and it could easily be the lady, which I feel like, I don't know, like, it could just as easily be John, because maybe he's trying to push everything on Flesh and Doc and try to twist the narrative on them. Maybe that's the real reason behind that. Or kind of what was kind of brought up as a message in this episode is that basically everyone's tearing themselves apart. After the girl died, it kind of was like, everyone's kind of cooped up in this one place, and just kind of everyone's scared, and they're likely to turn it on each other. And maybe that's the point. Maybe secretly someone in that place made a deal with the vampires that basically they get rid of everyone else and help make it a lot easier to get to Vanessa. I don't know. Maybe that's not the case, but that's kind of one hypothesis I'm throwing out there. We also learned a little bit more about Muhammad in this episode. Basically, he left with Vanessa when she snuck out to go try and find her daughter, even though Axel keeps telling her not to do that. Why? Because she's not trained enough. It's like, yeah, you're in your situation. You heal rapidly. You can somewhat handle your own against vampires, but the fact is, a large group of them, no, you're not well trained. At least in Axel's case and some of the others' cases, they fought vampires long enough to kind of be okay. But Vanessa hasn't fought them long enough, especially like a large group of them. It's like, by yourself, you won't last long. I mean, that's kind of why she got captured at the end of the episode. I mean, granted, that plus the fact is that she was trying to help other people, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, you're a good person. Like, you stayed behind to give them time to get away, especially because you know that the only person they're after is you. And part of me was thinking, I was hearing her screaming and stuff, and they're all gathered around her. I was like, oh, are they going to bite her? I was like, no, they shouldn't do that. But then, like, none of them bit her because you didn't see any wounds on her. I'm like, oh, good. Because that'd be kind of the idiot thing. Because I was wondering, because obviously Flesh kind of passed on the message last episode. You drank from Vanessa's blood and you will turn back into a human. So I'm sure they're all avoiding that with everything they can. And also, Julius in this episode, we kind of had an interesting conversation where some lady, I don't know, I'll chalk it up to possibly being his mom or maybe some elder vampire, I don't know, someone, an advisor or whatever. She was essentially being like, what it seemed like, basically, he's getting Vanessa not for necessarily himself, but, the big bad guy that kind of leads all the vampires. It seems like, just kind of different groups, and it seems like Julius kind of leads his own group, but he's kind of like, basically, he's kind of a lieutenant, and then a guy, I kind of already know his name is Dimitri just because of all the casting stuff. They're like, oh yeah, this is so-and-so playing Vanessa, so-and-so playing this character Dimitri, so I kind of already got his name spoiled for me being Dimitri, but I'm sure he's kind of like the top of the top when it comes to like all the vampire hierarchy. And obviously Julius is kind of one of the top class vampires too, but it's like he still answers to Dimitri. And so what I was kind of understanding from the conversation is that she was basically telling Julius not to hand over Vanessa, to use her as a means of taking power, like getting back what is rightfully his, that basically, I guess the top position that Dimitri's in should be his or something, or at least that Julius wants it. So it looks like there is a kind of a political angle amongst the vampire hierarchy that is like, oh, people, I mean, obviously, like, it's not just a stable situation of like everyone submits to their position. It's like, no, everyone's trying to bite their time, looking for any opportunity to rise up in the ranks and take, become even stronger, grab forth even more power. And it seems like that might be what Julius might have in mind. So, but getting back to Muhammad, we find out like kind of the main reason why he went out with Vanessa was because he wanted to get his sister, who I can only assume is the girl that was kind of watching that vampire lady and that dude have sex, and then she like slit his throat open, which that's kind of sad. It's like, yeah, she screws you and then kills you afterwards. Side note, is that, like, I don't know the actress' name, but is that the actress who played, what was her character's name? Like, I'm trying to remember her character's name from Alpha. She basically had a power of persuasion that once you looked at her, she could make you do whatever she wanted to make you do it. She also played Charlotte, Audrey's mom, on Haven. So I'm trying to tell if that's the same actress. I can't. It looks like it might be her. I might be completely wrong. So if you do know, let me know in the comments down below. But that girl that was watching that, we see her in this episode because the guy is kind of like, oh, we need to stand up to the vampires. She kind of wants to cooperate with him. It's like, oh, we can find a way into the armory or whatever, where all the weapons are locked up. I'm thinking that might be his sister, just because it's just like they focus on her too much for her just to be some random character. And also that the barcode, well, I mean, the mark, I called it barcode. I mean, I guess you could look at it almost like a barcode, but the marking on the back of his neck is kind of representing the fact that, I guess shows that you are somebody's property, particular vampires. So it makes you wonder, does each vampire have their own signal? I'm sure they do have their own, like, sigil, like, branded on people, being like, oh, this one belongs to blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, this marking means you belong to Julius. Oh, this mark means you belong to Dimitri, whatever. Because we also saw in this episode that there are people being kept as cattle, that every once in a while being drained of their blood. They're kept around simply for food source. It's like, rather than just eating them right now and just killing them, it's like you drink quite a bit of their blood, but give them some time to recover so you don't completely drain them out. I mean, but that's why I'm curious about that situation there, why she killed the dude she was having sex with. And I'm guessing it's because maybe like he was nearing the end of his usefulness, and maybe she was just like tired of having it. She's like, oh, she's had enough of this little play thing, so she got rid of him. I don't know. The guy there is kind of basically saying like, oh, if he's had enough of the fact is that they are treated like slaves. This country was built on freedom. He remembered a time that this country fought for freedom, and he's kind of trying to bring it back, even holding that American flag like that. So it's like we have to stand up and take back what's ours. Because interestingly enough, because I was wondering about that whole situation, like it's been going on for 3 years, the whole like ash filling the sky. That's why the vampires were able to take over like they did. But apparently it is thinning out. But they're having people work at plants that kind of, I guess, pollute the air a little bit more so that it's able to block out the sun, because they are running out of time. Because if enough time passes, I guess they've been contributing to like the ash in the past 3 years. That's why it hasn't completely dissipated. I'm sure a large part of the ash has stayed in the air and has been the main source of like keeping the sun blotted out. But I'm also thinking like they're contributing to it too, because as time passes on, it starts thinning out more and more, meaning more and more sun is coming out. Even using the words, they're saying like, oh, they might be even desperate. It's like if we take this opportunity to destroy some of their plants, it will kind of loosen some of the ash and smog in the air and allow more sun to come through, meaning they'll have to return to the shadows. But the lady that's kind of against it is like, you're an idiot. Because they're so desperate, they will fight that much harder to not return to the shadows, because they've had to hide in the shadows for who knows how long, and this is their first opportunity to being out and able to come out without having to hide away and fear the sun. It's like they're not going to give that up so easily. So I'm very curious to see where all that ends up going next episode. I mean, overall, that's very crazy that things like just like this whole murder situation, you still got to figure that out. I'm sure it's going to get even more complicated. We got even more people brought in, the people that Vanessa helped in this episode. And I'm guessing like that it's going to possibly lead to there being more future victims, and it's like, yo, who did it? And obviously it's going to be a part of the original group and not these new people. It's just like I'm very curious to find out who it is and for what reason they did what they did. Maybe it's not even connected to like I thought up earlier. The fact is that it's like, oh yeah, they're helping the vampires out, trying to call destruction amongst the group and whatever, have the group turn against each other. I mean, maybe it's that, but maybe the point is to destroy the group. But maybe the reason why she died is because she came upon something she wasn't supposed to. Maybe she saw something or heard something she wasn't supposed to, and that's why she, out of everyone, died. So, and also in this episode, since I kind of brought it up, Vanessa went back home and everything. She went back to her and Dylan's apartment, where she kind of casually brought it up. The fact is, it's like, oh, her and Muhammad are there, and they're looking at the blood, and he's like, oh, could that be your daughter's? And she's like, no, that's mine. It's from when I died. And Muhammad's like, dude, you know how crazy you sound right now? So I guess that means her memory came back. I mean, the thing is, they didn't make a big deal out of it. Normally, with a TV show, when someone's memory's coming back, they would like, maybe she'd walk upon a scene and then it kind of like, a sepitone, not sepitone, just like a certain filter, I don't know if it's a filter kind of covers the screen, and then it's like, oh, this is a flashback showing her remembering the fact that this happened. But it's just kind of like, no, she walked upon it. So maybe her memories came back earlier, or maybe just they instantly returned to her the moment she saw the blood that came back to her, that she got murdered, so that she died, so. But she does definitely know, because she looked at some prints underneath the dust in her house and found out, it's like, oh, Dylan was alive after I died, so it's like, it's okay. Like, I do know that she is somewhere out there. So I am very curious to see where this whole thing goes, like, with, the vampires fighting, like, have her and everything, and what will Julius do? Like, will she be able to break free? I mean, we do have Axel, getting ready to get locked and loaded and go after her. It makes you wonder, would the entire group be behind him or not? Because that's another thing, too, in this episode. Like, the reason why he didn't go was because Doc told him not to, because she was like, we still have to find the person that killed this girl. I need your help. And it's just kind of like, but at the same time, it's like, because he brought up in this episode, like, oh, your mission's done and everything. It's like, for him, it's not. Because, I mean, that's the reason why he stayed behind. That's why he kept Doc alive, because he was hoping that, like, all three, to him, Doc, and Vanessa, just all together, could fix this whole situation. But Doc is like, your job is over, and for him it's not, because it's like, Vanessa's here, she's awake, he can see what she's capable of, she's important to all this, she can be the cure to kind of end the situation. So for him, his mission isn't over, because whether he has orders or not, I don't think that's the reason why he stayed behind. He can argue that, oh, he stayed behind because he was a good soldier. But for staying behind like he did for 3 years, it's like, no. Because you even saw Ted kind of lose his mind and decided, like, no, I've had enough. I've got to do something different. If I end up dying, I'd still be it. But at the very least, I have to do something because I can't keep going living like this, guarding a lady that we don't know anything about, that we don't know whether we're doing is anything important. But also, it's because, like, the doc, like, it's like, you also realize how important Vanessa is. Yes, I get it, the whole situation about, like, oh, yeah, there's a killer here. Yeah, that's very important, but also, Vanessa's very important. It's like, the last thing you want is her being captured, like, by the vampires, like she was in this episode. So at the same time, it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's one of those situations I'm a little conflicted. And I'm sure Axel was, too. He decided to stay behind, but I think it was mainly, like, because I think Axel also, because he made the promise to her that no matter what goes down, he'll be by her side. So that's another thing I'm curious about in the next episode, where we see kind of the doc having objections of it, because she's like, no, you can't go. Remember, we got a killer to deal with. And maybe he'll be like, you see all these people here? If there's a killer, they're not going to do anything with this many people around, so you're safe for now. And the doc should have her objections. But the fact is, he has to look out for Vanessa, not only because she's important to this whole situation, but also because he promised to stick by her through thick and thin. So, I mean, that's my thought process on it. So, I really don't take the opportunity to, but I should say it more often. I'm going to try and say it more often in these, and that is, if you tell me what your thoughts about the episode, some things that you might think, whether you agree with some things I said, disagree, like, I'd like to have more of a conversation, because I kind of leave these to be very one-sided. I kind of every once in a while interject something, be like, oh yeah, tell me this and that, correct me on this or that, and, which is fine and dandy, but I do want a more conversational aspect to it. But with the way I'm doing these now, it's not necessarily the easiest thing. I have an idea about doing that, but it's just kind of like, that's kind of something that had to be later on in the works. It can't be something I'm doing right now. But nevertheless, I would like your input on, like, like I said, I'm going to try to ask you more often than not, what you thought about the episode, what you liked, disliked, what are you looking forward to, what are your hypothesis about certain things. So, but that's really all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.